They didn't yell, they didn't argue. Hospital security simply grabbed the new nurse by the arm and shoved her into a storage room like she was in the way. "Stay here," they said. "You're not cleared for this." The door slammed shut. On the other side of that wall, doctors were scrambling to save an unidentified patient whose condition was deteriorating fast. Alarms were screaming. Orders were flying. And no one realized they had just locked away the only person who recognized what was really happening. Inside the dark storage room, the nurse didn't panic. She listened. She remembered the way the patient's body moved, the way his breathing didn't match the diagnosis, the way his injuries didn't make sense for an ordinary case. And then her phone vibrated. One message, one name. One phrase that changed everything. "Senior command has been notified." Minutes later, the hospital would be surrounded, careers would be frozen, and the people who pushed her into that room would wish they had asked one simple question first. Before we continue, like the video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. At 2:07 a.m., the night shift at Redwood Memorial Hospital was exactly what it was supposed to be: quiet enough to feel safe, busy enough to stay sharp. The ER lights cast a pale glow over polished floors. A half-empty waiting room dozed under muted television noise. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their footsteps soft, their voices low. This was the hour when mistakes happened, not because people were careless, but because everyone assumed the worst was already over. Emily Carter adjusted the IV pump in Bay 2 and checked the monitor one more time before stepping back. She was new to Redwood Memorial, 3 weeks in, still learning where supplies were kept, still getting used to the way this hospital ran. She didn't rush. She didn't chatter. She worked quietly, methodically, like someone who trusted process more than attention. Her badge read Emily Carter, RN. No extra titles, no flair, no hints. That suited her fine. At the nurses' station, 2 residents whispered over a chart. "That's the new one?" one asked, nodding toward Emily. "Yeah," the other replied. "Night shift dumped her on us." Emily pretended not to hear. She always did. The overhead speakers crackled. "Security to ER entrance, incoming patient, no family, no ID." Emily's head lifted immediately. No ID at this hour usually meant one of 2 things: homelessness or something people didn't want to explain yet. The ambulance arrived fast, too fast. The doors burst open and paramedics rushed in, voices tight with urgency. "Male, mid-40s, one shouted. "Found unconscious near an industrial site, breathing shallow. Vitals unstable." The stretcher slammed into the trauma bay. Emily moved instinctively, stepping closer to assess, but was immediately blocked by a cluster of white coats. "Who's covering this?" the attending physician barked. "I've got it," said Dr. Michael Rains, confidence dripping from his tone. "Let's move." Emily stayed back, watching. The patient's face was bruised, jaw clenched, eyes fluttering beneath closed lids. His breathing was controlled, too controlled, not panicked, not erratic, trained. Emily felt a faint tightening in her chest. She stepped forward. "Doctor!" "Hold," Rains snapped, not looking at her. "We don't need extra hands." Emily stopped. She watched instead. The monitors beeped steadily, but something felt wrong. The patient's chest rose evenly, but the rhythm didn't match the numbers on the screen. His left hand twitched once, fingers curling sharply before relaxing again. That wasn't a seizure. That was muscle memory. Emily frowned slightly. She edged closer again. "Sir, his breathing pattern?" "Security," Rains said loudly, irritation creeping in. "Clear the area." 2 security officers stepped in immediately. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "I'm assigned to this bay," Emily said calmly. "Not anymore," one officer replied. "Orders." Emily looked past them at the patient. The twitch happened again, subtle, controlled, familiar. Her jaw tightened. "This man is—" The officer placed a hand on her arm, firm, final. "Come with us." Emily didn't resist. She knew better than to waste energy on the wrong fight. They guided her down the hallway, past the nurses' station, past supply carts and closed doors. Staff glanced up briefly, then looked away. The end of the corridor loomed, a gray metal door. Storage. Staff, only the officer opened it and gestured inside. Wait here. I need to be in the ER, Emily said. You'll be fine, he replied. Just stay put. The door closed, the lock clicked. Emily stood alone in the dim, narrow room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with linens, IV fluids, spare equipment. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The hospital sounds were distant now, muffled alarms, indistinct voices bleeding through concrete. Emily exhaled slowly. She wasn't angry, she was focused. She pressed her palm against the cool metal shelving and listened. Through the wall, she could hear the ER escalating, orders overlapping, monitors rising in pitch. A rhythm breaking down. She replayed the patient in her mind, the clenched jaw, the controlled breathing, the twitch. She'd seen that before, not here, not in a civilian hospital. Her eyes dropped to her badge, generic, temporary. She de-requested it that way. Emily reached into her pocket and felt the thin, laminated card hidden there. She didn't pull it out yet. She didn't need to, not yet. She stepped toward the door and knocked once. Firm. Open this, she called evenly. You're missing something. No response. She knocked again, louder. That patient is not an unidentified civilian, she said, and you're about to make this worse. Silence. Emily closed her eyes briefly. She inhaled, then exhaled. She wasn't surprised. Back in the ER, the situation deteriorated. BP's dropping. Why isn't he responding? Get respiratory in here. Dr. Rains frowned at the monitor. This doesn't line up. No one answered him because the one person who could had been locked away. In the storage room, Emily finally pulled the card from her pocket. It was worn at the edges, creased, faded, not a hospital ID. Something else. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she folded it back up and slid it away. Instead, she pulled out her phone, no signal. She wasn't surprised by that either. She knocked again, slowly this time. If you don't open this door, she said, voice calm and controlled, you're going to have a much bigger problem than protocol. Her tone wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. On the other side of the wall, an alarm screamed. Emily's jaw tightened. She knew what came next, not because she'd planned it, but because once a certain line was crossed, things moved fast, very fast. Somewhere far beyond Redwood Memorial, a notification would be triggered. A name would be flagged. A chain of command would wake up. And when that happened, the hospital wouldn't be in charge anymore. Emily leaned back against the shelf and waited, not helpless, not afraid, just counting the minutes. Because the worst mistake they'd made wasn't pushing her into a storage room. It was assuming she didn't belong anywhere else. The storage room felt smaller with every passing second, not because the walls were moving, but because the sounds outside were changing. Emily Carter stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, listening through concrete and steel. Years of experience had taught her how to separate noise from meaning. Raised voices didn't matter. Panic didn't matter, patterns did. And the pattern on the other side of the wall was breaking down fast. A monitor alarm spiked high and sharp. Someone cursed loudly. A gurney rattled across the floor at speed. Why isn't he responding? A voice shouted. Emily closed her eyes. They were treating symptoms, not cause. She moved back to the door and knocked again, harder this time. You need to stop escalating interventions, she called out. You're pushing him the wrong direction. Nothing. The door stayed locked. Emily exhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to stay steady. Panic never helped. It blurred judgment. She de-learned that lesson the hard way. She glanced around the room, cataloging without thinking. Linen carts, saline boxes, a crash kit mounted to the wall. No phone, no camera, no windows, deliberately isolated. Fine, she murmured to herself. Then we do this the long way. She slid down onto a crate, resting her elbows on her knees, eyes unfocused as she replayed the patient's presentation in her mind, frame by frame. The bruising pattern, the clenched jaw, the breathing cadence, that wasn't trauma from a fall. That was controlled breathing under stress. Someone trained to stay conscious longer than the body wanted. And that meant whoever he was, he'd been conditioned not to show distress until it was too late. Emily opened her eyes. They're going to miss the crash window, she whispered. In the ER, Dr. Michael Rains felt the shift before he understood it. The patient's vitals weren't just unstable anymore, they were inconsistent, spiking, dropping, then stabilizing briefly before slipping again. "Give me another line," Rains ordered. "We're losing him." A nurse hesitated. "Doctor, we already—" "Do it." The room buzzed with activity, but nothing worked the way it should have. "This doesn't make sense," Rains muttered. He should have responded by now. Security stood off to the side, uneasy. One of them shifted his weight. "Should we let that nurse back in?" Rains snapped his head up. No, she was interfering. The word hung there, interfering. Another alarm blared. Back in the storage room, Emily stood abruptly. That tone, she'd heard it before. The one that came right before people lost control of the situation. She pounded on the door once, sharp, commanding. "Listen to me," she said clearly. "You are about to cause a catastrophic failure." Still nothing. Emily reached into her pocket again. This time she pulled the laminated card out fully. It wasn't flashy. No seal, no foe. Just a name, a number, and a clearance tier printed in stark black. She stared at it for a second longer than necessary. Then she flipped it over. There was a single emergency contact printed on the back. Emily hesitated. Once she used it, things wouldn't stay quiet. She pressed the card back into her pocket and reached instead for her phone again, stepping toward the door, angling it carefully. One bar flickered. Gone, she swore under her breath. In the ER, the patient convulsed slightly, muscles tightening. "What was that?" a resident asked. "Seizure." Another guessed. "No," Rains said slowly. "That wasn't a seizure." He frowned, stepping closer. The patient's hand twitched again, same movement Emily had seen, controlled, purposeful. Rains felt a chill creep up his spine. That wasn't random. That was trained. His eyes drifted toward the hallway, the storage room. Emily heard the change in rhythm through the wall. The panic had sharpened. She knocked again, slow, deliberate. "Michael," she called out. The use of his first name was intentional. On the other side, Rains froze. "Who said that?" He demanded. Security exchanged looks. "That nurse," one said. She's still locked in. Rains swallowed. "How does she know my name?" Emily leaned closer to the door. "You're missing the primary threat," she said calmly. "And if you intubate him now, you'll make it worse." Rains' voice came back through the door, strained. "What are you talking about?" Emily closed her eyes briefly. "They're increasing pressure without relieving the cause," she said. "You're suffocating him from the inside." Silence followed, then hurried footsteps. Keys rattled. The door didn't open. Someone was arguing. In the ER, Rains snapped. "Get radiology on standby." Now a resident whispered, "What about the nurse?" Rains hesitated. The patient's monitor dipped again. "Damn it," Rains muttered. He looked toward security. "Unlock the door." Before they could move, a phone rang, not a hospital phone, a personal one. Security glanced down at the screen and went pale. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think you need to see this." Rains snatched the phone. The caller ID displayed a name that didn't belong in an ER at 2 in the morning. He answered. "Yes." The voice on the other end was calm, controlled. "This is joint operations. We're tracking a patient who just arrived at your facility." Rains' stomach dropped. "You need to release Nurse Emily Carter immediately," the voice continued, "and secure the ward." Rains looked slowly toward the locked door. "Who is she?" he asked. A pause, then. "She's not lost." The line went dead. In the storage room, Emily felt her phone vibrate. One message, "Stand by. Senior command en route." She exhaled slowly, not relief, acceptance. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and straightened her shoulders. Outside, alarms blared again. Doors slammed. Voices rose. The hospital was starting to realize something was very wrong. And the worst part? They still hadn't unlocked the door. Emily waited, not because she had to, but because when command arrived, she wanted everyone to see exactly where they'd put her, and exactly why it had been a mistake. The ER tipped from confusion into urgency so fast it felt physical. "Doctor." Michael Rains stood at the foot of the stretcher, staring at the patient's monitor as if willing it to make sense. Heart rate erratic. Oxygen dipping, then rebounding just enough to tease hope. Blood pressure narrowing. Nothing was following the expected curve. Radiology tied up, a resident said. 10 minutes minimum. We don't have 10, Rains snapped. Across the room, security hovered near the corridor, keys clenched in one hand. The storage room door sat at the end of the hall like a bad decision everyone suddenly remembered making. Rains turned toward it, then back to the patient. The patient's jaw tightened again, same movement, same controlled tension. Rains felt his throat go dry. Pause, he said, the room slowed, hands hovering mid-motion. Everyone stop for a second, Rains ordered. Just look. They did. The patient's breathing wasn't chaotic, it was managed, shallow, measured like someone rationing air. The left hand twitched again, fingers curling in a pattern that wasn't random. That's not involuntary, Rains murmured. A resident swallowed. Doctor, what is it? Before Rains could answer, the alarm surged. Oxygen's crashing, BP dropping. The patient arched slightly, chest straining against restraints. Get ready to intubate, someone shouted. Rains hesitated, just long enough for doubt to matter. Wait, he said. The room stilled again. Rains looked toward the hall. Unlock the storage room, he said. Now. Inside the storage room, Emily Carter felt the vibration before she heard the keys. Metal scraping metal, footsteps, voices arguing in low, urgent tones. The lock turned. The door opened halfway. Emily didn't rush out. She stood where she was, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes calm. Rains stared at her like she'd stepped out of another timeline. You should have listened earlier, Emily said, not accusing, just factual. You're out of margin. Rains swallowed. What are we missing? Emily didn't answer him. She walked straight past, eyes already on the patient. The room parted instinctively. She stopped at the bedside, scanning in seconds what others had studied for nearly an hour. Pressure's building, she said. You're treating secondary collapse. Primary cause is still active. A resident frowned. Active how? Emily placed 2 fingers lightly at the patient's neck, then slid her hand to his chest. There, she said. Subtle asymmetry, you won't see it on the screen yet. Rains watched her hands. Say it, he said quietly. Tension pneumothorax with delayed presentation, Emily replied. And you're about to make it fatal if you tube him. The resident shook his head, but there was no trauma. Emily met his eyes. Not all trauma is obvious, she said, and not all training leaves visible marks. The patient gasped sharply. The monitor screamed. Rains didn't hesitate this time. What do you need? He asked. Emily already had the needle. Give me space, she said. Security backed up without being told. Emily positioned herself, precise and unhurried. The room held its breath. She inserted the needle. The hiss cut through the noise like a blade. Air rushed out, violent, unmistakable. The patient inhaled deeply, body shuddering as oxygen finally reached where it hadn't. The alarms softened, then steadied. The room exhaled as one. A resident whispered, Jesus. Rains stared at the monitor, then at Emily. You called this from a hallway, he said. I called it from his breathing, Emily replied. The patient stabilized, but the ward did not. Phones rang, not overhead, private. One of the charge nurses looked at her screen and froze. Doctor, she said quietly, there are people asking about this patient. How? Rains asked. They already know he's here. Security shifted uneasily. Another call came in, then another. Administration wants you upstairs, a clerk said, pale. Now, Rains looked at Emily. She didn't look surprised. They're coming, she said. Who? He asked. Emily met his eyes. The people who don't like surprises, she replied. 10 minutes later, the elevators opened onto the ER floor and the temperature changed. Not literally, but everyone felt it. 2 men in dark suits stepped out first. No badges, no explanations. Behind them, uniformed officers moved with controlled precision, spreading just enough to make it clear the hospital was no longer setting the perimeter. A senior administrator hurried forward, smile already cracking. Gentlemen, welcome to Redwood Memorial. Where is the patient? One of the men asked calmly. And where is Nurse Emily Carter? Every head turned. Emily didn't move. She stepped forward when the man's eyes found her. That's me, she said. He nodded once. Thank you for staying, he said. We need the ward secured. Rains blinked. Excuse me, who are you? The man turned to him. "Not your chain of command," he said, "but effective immediately we outrank it." The administrator swallowed. "On whose authority?" The man held up a phone. "Senior command," he replied. "They're listening." The ward was locked down, no one in, no one out. Phones were silenced, doors were closed. Emily stood near the patient, watching the monitors settle into a stable rhythm. Rains approached her quietly. "You knew," he said. Emily nodded. "I suspected." "Who is he?" Rains asked, lowering his voice. Emily glanced at the patient, then back at Rains. "Someone whose body learned to endure things most people never will," she said, "and someone whose presence was never supposed to be quiet." Rains let out a slow breath. "And you?" he asked. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and removed the laminated card at last. She didn't hand it to him, she just let him see it. Rains' eyes widened. "That clearance," he started. Emily slid the card away. "You don't need details," she said. "You just need to understand why locking me in a storage room didn't make this go away." Rains nodded slowly. Outside the ward, boots echoed. Orders were given. The hospital had shifted from emergency medicine to something else entirely, and Emily Carter stood exactly where she belonged. At the center of it, as the consequences of being ignored finally arrived. The ER no longer belonged to Redwood Memorial Hospital. That realization settled slowly, then all at once. Uniformed personnel moved with deliberate efficiency, positioning themselves at every entrance and corridor leading to the emergency wing. Radios crackled quietly, doors were secured. The casual authority of hospital administrators dissolved the moment men who didn't ask for permission began giving instructions. Dr. Michael Rains stood near the nurses' station, watching it happen with a tight jaw. "This is a hospital," he said under his breath. "No," replied one of the men in suits calmly, not looking at him. "Right now, it's a protected site." The senior administrator tried again, voice strained but polite. "You can't just take over an active medical facility. There are protocols." "There were protocols when your staff locked a cleared asset in a storage room," the man interrupted. "Those protocols no longer apply." The administrator's face drained of color. Across the ward, Emily Carter remained by the patient's bedside, adjusting the drip rate, watching the monitor with steady focus. The chaos around her didn't register. It never did when something mattered. The patient's breathing was even now, still assisted, still fragile, but alive. That had bought them time, time Redwood Memorial hadn't earned. One of the uniformed officers approached Emily and stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "senior command is on the line." Emily nodded once. "Put it through." The officer handed her a secure phone. Rains watched from a few feet away as Emily accepted it, not nervously, not eagerly, but like someone answering a long-expected call. "Yes," she said. A pause. "Yes, he's stabilized." Another pause. "I intervened when necessary." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Rains, not accusing, not apologetic, just factual. "Yes," she continued. "I was detained by hospital security prior to intervention." Rains swallowed. "Yes," Emily said, "that's correct." She listened for a long moment, then replied, "Understood." She handed the phone back. "He wants a full situation brief," the officer said. "In person." Rains stiffened. "Who does?" Emily finally looked at him fully. "Senior command," she said. Within minutes, the elevators chimed again. This time, no one pretended not to notice. A man in a dark service uniform stepped out, posture rigid, presence heavy. His rank insignia caught the light immediately. He wasn't tall, but the space around him seemed to contract as he moved. Conversation died on the spot. Behind him followed two aides and a medical officer carrying a tablet already displaying live data. The man scanned the ER once, eyes sharp, assessing. "Where is the patient?" he asked. Emily stepped forward. "Bay 3, she said. The man turned toward her and paused. Recognition flickered across his face. Subtle but unmistakable. "Emily," he said. "Yes, sir." Rain's heart dropped into his stomach. The man nodded once. You were supposed to be consulting, not locked in a closet. Storage room, Emily thought, but she didn't correct him. I adapted, she said. A flicker of something like approval crossed his face. He turned to Rains. You're the attending? Yes, Rains replied, straightening instinctively. You authorized intubation before decompression, the man said flatly. Rains opened his mouth, then closed it again. You were wrong, the man continued. She was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Rains nodded, throat dry. Yes, sir. The man turned back to Emily. Status. Stable for now, Emily replied. Chest tube placed, monitoring ongoing, delayed collapse likely from unrecognized pressure buildup. The medical officer beside the man glanced at his tablet, then nodded. That tracks. The man's jaw tightened. How many people knew who he was when he arrived? He asked. No one answered. That's what I thought, he said. The senior administrator stepped forward again, voice trembling slightly. Sir, with all due respect, our staff acted based on the information available. You acted based on assumptions, the man interrupted, and you punished the one person who didn't share them. The administrator tried to recover. We had no way of knowing her. Clearance, the man finished. Training. Authorization. He turned toward Emily again. She requested a temporary badge, the man said, specifically to avoid attention. Emily nodded. And you decided that made her expendable, he said, looking back at the administrator. Silence. Rains watched as the hierarchy he'd trusted his entire career rearranged itself in real time. Hospital leadership, people he answered to daily, now stood quietly while someone else dictated terms. The man turned to the room at large. Effective immediately, he said. This ward is under joint oversight. Medical decisions remain with clinical staff, but strategic authority rests with us. A murmur rippled through the ER, and before anyone asks, he added, yes, this supersedes hospital policy. He turned back to Emily. You should never have been removed from that room, he said. Emily met his gaze steadily. I understand why they did it. That doesn't excuse it, he replied. No, she agreed. The patient stirred faintly. Emily noticed instantly. She moved closer, adjusting positioning, checking response. He's coming around, she said. The man nodded. Good. He looked at Rains again. You nearly lost him, he said. Not because you're incompetent, but because you stopped listening. Rains absorbed that quietly. Yes, sir. Within the next hour, the ER functioned under a new reality. Orders were double-checked, decisions slowed but sharpened. No one dismissed observations casually anymore. And no one ignored Emily Carter. When she spoke, people paused, not out of fear, out of respect. The senior officer stood near the doorway, watching the ward stabilize. You didn't have to stay calm, he said to Emily quietly. After what they did. Emily adjusted the IV line one last time. Calm keeps people alive, she replied. He nodded. Outside, engines idled. The night wasn't over yet, but the hospital had already crossed a line it couldn't uncross. And this time, Emily wasn't the one being moved out of the way. By the time the sun began to rise over Redwood Memorial Hospital, the night had left scars. Not visible ones. The kind that stayed with people. The ER was quiet in the way only exhaustion could create, movements slower, voices lower, every sound carrying weight. Uniformed personnel still lined the corridors, but they'd stepped back now, allowing the hospital to breathe again under supervision it hadn't expected to answer to. Emily Carter stood at the bedside in Bay 3, eyes steady on the monitor. The patient was awake now, not fully alert but conscious enough to follow commands. His breathing was controlled, chest tube functioning exactly as intended. Alive, that was what mattered. Behind her, Dr. Michael Rains approached cautiously, as if entering unfamiliar territory. He's stable, he said. Emily nodded. For now. Rains hesitated. I wanted to say I was wrong. Emily didn't turn. You corrected it. That doesn't erase what happened. No, she agreed, but it changes what happens next. Rains absorbed that quietly. Down the hall, the senior administrator sat in a chair that suddenly felt much smaller than it had hours earlier. His phone buzzed continuously, calls he didn't want to answer yet. A man in uniform stood in front of him, posture relaxed but immovable. "You'll be receiving a formal notice," the man said, "regarding staff conduct and procedural interference." The administrator swallowed. "We were protecting operations." "You were protecting authority," the man replied. "Those are not the same thing." Back in the ER, the patient's eyes opened more fully. Emily leaned in slightly. "You're safe," she said calmly. "You're in a hospital." His gaze focused slowly, sharp despite the sedation. "Figures," he murmured. Emily almost smiled. He looked at her more closely now, really seeing her. "They locked you out," he said quietly. "Yes," Emily replied, his jaw tightened. "That was a mistake." Emily met his eyes. It was corrected. The patient nodded once. That was enough. Later that morning, the uniformed officer who had arrived with senior command stood near the nurses' station, reviewing final notes on his tablet. He looked up as Emily approached. "They're clearing the perimeter," he said. "We're done here." Emily nodded. He hesitated. "You know they'll want you back, officially." "I know," she said, "and—" Emily glanced back toward Bay 3. "I'll decide," she replied. The officer smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that." At 8:14 a.m., shift change began. Day staff arrived, unaware of how close the night had come to unraveling. They noticed the uniforms first, then the quiet, then the way certain people wouldn't meet their eyes. Emily handed off her reports with precision. No embellishment, no commentary. Just facts. When she finished, she unclipped her badge and set it on the counter. Temporary, plain, still intentional. She stepped into the locker room, changed, and emerged dressed simply, no uniform, no insignia. As she walked toward the exit, Rains caught up with her. "You're leaving?" he asked. "For now," Emily said. Rains nodded. "If you ever—" She stopped and turned to him. "Listen first," she said, "then ask." Rains smiled thinly. "Fair." Outside, the morning air was cool and clean, washing away the sterile weight of the hospital. The engines that had once idled with authority were gone now. Just the city waking up unaware. Emily paused at the curb. Her phone buzzed. One message: "Stand down complete. Thank you." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and started walking. Behind her, Redwood Memorial returned to its routines, charts, rounds, policies rewritten quietly in the aftermath of what had happened. Some people would remember the night as chaos. Others would remember it as embarrassment. A few would remember it as a warning. But Emily carried none of that with her. She carried the knowledge that when it mattered, when time collapsed and authority failed, she'd been exactly where she needed to be. And next time she wouldn't wait behind a locked door, because some mistakes are forgiven, others are learned from. And Redwood Memorial would never again mistake silence for insignificance.